They thought they could keep her out, that their wealth and privilege could protect them from change. But what happens when the person they rejected turns the tables in a way they never saw coming? Let us know in the comment section below if you've ever witnessed karma come full circle. Simone Carter stepped out of her sleek black Range Rover and onto the perfectly manicured driveway of Pinecrest Country Club. The grand iron gates behind her clanked shut, as if sealing her fate before she even made it to the entrance. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and arrogance. Men in pastel polos and crisp khaki shorts strolled leisurely toward the clubhouse, their laughter echoing through the morning air. Women, draped in diamonds and designer sunglasses, sat on the patio sipping mimosas, as if their only care in the world was how their latest Botox touch-up was settling. Simone had seen this scene before, many times in many places, and she had always been the outsider looking in. Not today. She strode forward with confidence, her navy blue athletic dress hugging her toned frame, her curls bouncing with every step. Heads turned as she passed, some out of curiosity, others out of irritation. She was used to it. It was the same look she got in boardrooms when people underestimated her, the same look she had seen at investment meetings where they assumed she was an assistant rather than the CEO. She didn't need their approval. She wasn't here for them. At the reception desk, a man with silver hair and a practiced smile glanced up from his clipboard. His name tag read, Harold Stetson, Membership Director. "Good morning," Simone said, flashing a polite but firm smile. "I have a meeting with the membership committee." Harold's eyes flickered with something she recognized immediately. Hesitation. His lips pursed slightly, like he had just tasted something bitter. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice coated in fake warmth. "Right this way." She followed him through the clubhouse, past trophy cases filled with gleaming awards, most of them won by men who looked nothing like her. The club had a long history, one it was proud of, but a history that had also been meticulously curated. No diversity, no change. That was about to end. The boardroom was grand but sterile. Dark mahogany walls, a long polished table, and a massive oil painting of the club's founder, a man who looked like he had never smiled a day in his life. Seated at the table were 6 men, all over 60, all wearing the same expression, a mixture of forced politeness and subtle disdain. Simone took a seat, crossing her legs gracefully, her manicured fingers resting lightly on the table. She didn't fidget, she didn't shrink. She had faced tougher rooms than this one. Miss Carter, a man with deep frown lines and a blazer that looked like it hadn't been updated since the Reagan era began. "Thank you for coming in today. We've reviewed your application." There it was. Simone smiled. The man cleared his throat, glancing at his colleagues. "While we certainly admire your accomplishments, Pinecrest has always upheld a very particular standard. Membership here isn't simply about financial qualifications, as you surely understand." Simone nodded. "Of course. I am more than qualified. I've met every requirement listed on your application." Another man, this one with a ruddy complexion and a golf pin on his lapel, leaned forward. "It's not just about requirements, Miss Carter. It's about tradition." Ah, the magic word. Tradition. The same word that had been used to keep people like her out of country clubs, corporate boardrooms, and private institutions for generations. The same word that had been used to disguise exclusion as a matter of culture instead of prejudice. She tilted her head slightly. Tradition is important, but it evolves. That's how institutions grow. The ruddy-faced man smirked. "Pinecrest isn't looking to grow. We're looking to maintain what we've built." A long silence stretched across the table. Simone exhaled softly, pressing her tongue against the inside of her cheek. She had expected resistance. She had expected the coded language, but she had also expected them to at least attempt to be subtle. "So, let me be clear," she said evenly. "Despite my qualifications, despite the fact that I can afford this membership without a second thought, You're denying my application because I don't fit your tradition? The men exchanged quick glances. Miss Carter, the man in the blazer said, his voice softer now, as if he were doing her a favor, it's not personal. As if being picked out for prom was personal enough. Simone chuckled. Oh, it's very personal, but I appreciate the honesty. She stood up, smoothing out her dress. The tension in the room thickened. You know, she continued, her voice calm but cutting. Exclusivity is only valuable when it doesn't come back to bite you, and trust me when I say, this is going to bite you. The ruddy-faced man scoffed. Is that a threat? Simone smirked. Not at all. Just a guarantee. She turned and walked out, leaving behind 6 men who still believed their world would never change. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The whispers started the following week. The club's board members dismissed them at first, assuming they were nothing more than idle gossip. But then came the emails. Then the hushed conversations in the locker rooms. Then the rumors reached the clubhouse, where cigar smoke mixed with uncertainty. Something was happening. Something they couldn't quite put their fingers on, but they knew it wasn't good. Simone Carter wasn't the type of woman to take no for an answer. That much became clear when her face appeared on the cover of a major business magazine just days after their little rejection meeting. The headline read, "The Woman Who Rewrites the Rules of the Game." Beneath it was a sharp, powerful image of Simone standing on the steps of an entirely different golf course, one just as exclusive as Pinecrest, if not more. The caption was simple. Her next move will be her boldest yet. The members of Pinecrest had no idea what was coming. Harold Stetson, the membership director, could feel the tension the moment he walked into the boardroom. The men at the table weren't as smug as they had been the last time Simone sat before them. Their jaws were tight, their expressions guarded. "We have a problem," one of them finally admitted, tossing the magazine onto the table. "She's making us look bad." "Let her talk," another scoffed. "She didn't get in, she'll move on." The room fell silent. No one believed that. "She's not the type to let things go," Harold muttered, rubbing his temples. "We've all seen her work. She's built an empire out of proving people wrong." "Well, what do we do?" No one had an answer. Simone, meanwhile, was busy setting the wheels in motion. The rejection had been expected. It was never about membership. It was about control. She had spent years watching institutions like Pinecrest hide behind rules and legacy, their walls built not from bricks but from decades of exclusion. But she wasn't interested in knocking on their doors anymore. She was interested in owning them. Sitting in her downtown office, Simone's fingers drummed lightly against the mahogany desk as she listened to her lawyer on speakerphone. "Everything is moving smoothly," the voice confirmed. "The offer is in place, and we should have an answer soon." She smirked. "And the board? They have no clue what's happening. They think they're untouchable." Simone leaned back in her chair, satisfied. Perfect. By the end of the week, the whispers had turned into full-blown panic. The board members sat stiffly around the table as their legal counsel cleared his throat. "We received an offer," he announced, adjusting his glasses. Silence. "Offer? To buy the club?" A scoff. "Impossible. The club isn't for sale." The lawyer hesitated. "Technically, it is." The room tensed. "As you all know, the club is structured as a private entity with shareholder interests. The founding families own controlling stakes, but there's a clause. If an interested party offers a substantial enough amount, the board is required to consider it. And, gentlemen, we're talking substantial." A deep frown settled across Harold's face. "Who?" The lawyer sighed. "Simone Carter." The room erupted. Voices overlapped in anger, disbelief, and panic. Harold gripped the arms of his chair, feeling as if the air had been sucked out of the room. "He planned this," someone hissed. Of course he had. Meanwhile, Simone was already celebrating. Not publicly, not yet, but in her penthouse office, a small smirk tugged at her lips as she sipped her whiskey. She had spent the last few months buying up shares, forming partnerships, and working with silent investors who had long since grown tired of Pinecrest's exclusionary practices. She hadn't needed to fight for a seat at their table. She had simply bought the whole damn table. Back at Pinecrest, the reality was beginning to sink in. "This is absurd," one of the board members growled. "She's trying to strong-arm us into letting her in." "No," Harold said quietly. "She doesn't want in, she wants us out." And she was about to get exactly what she wanted. The boardroom at Pinecrest was in chaos. The men who once sat comfortably in their power now shifted uneasily in their leather chairs. Their voices clashed, overlapping in a frenzy of disbelief, anger, and desperation. A week ago they had laughed at Simone Carter. Now they were scrambling to save the club from her grasp. "This can't be happening," one of them muttered, running a hand through his graying hair. "The club has been in our hands for generations." Harold Stetson sat stiffly at the head of the table, flipping through the thick stack of legal documents before him. Everything was in order, everything was airtight. Simone had played the game flawlessly. "She didn't just buy into the club," Harold finally spoke, his voice hollow. "She bought everything. Land, assets, shares, and with her controlling interest." He exhaled slowly, closing the folder in front of him. "She owns Pinecrest." The silence that followed was deafening. Across town, Simone Carter watched the sunrise from the balcony of her high-rise penthouse, coffee in hand, expression unreadable. It had taken months of calculated moves, of quiet acquisitions and strategic partnerships, but the moment had finally arrived. The final paperwork was set to be signed today, and by nightfall, Pinecrest would be hers. She thought back to the rejection, the smug faces, the condescension dripping from their words, the way they had dismissed her, believing that their wealth, their legacy, would shield them from change. They had underestimated her, and now they would pay for it. By the time she arrived at Pinecrest that afternoon, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. She stepped through the clubhouse doors, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floors, the sound echoing in the vast hall. All eyes turned to her, some with curiosity, others with resentment. She didn't care. Harold was waiting in the boardroom, along with a handful of remaining members who hadn't already slithered away to salvage their pride. He stood when she entered, his face a mask of forced politeness. "Ms. Carter," he greeted her stiffly, gesturing toward a chair. "Shall we get this over with?" She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Gladly." The documents were spread out before her, and as she skimmed through the final pages, she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on the room. The last vestiges of old money clinging to their illusion of control. She took her time, letting them sit in their discomfort. Then, with a swift, deliberate stroke of her pen, she signed the papers. It was done. She leaned back in her chair, letting the realization settle over them. Their club, their traditions, their exclusivity. All of it now belonged to her. Harold cleared his throat, his face flushed. "I assume you'll want to make changes." She met his gaze. "Of course." The men exchanged nervous glances. "How drastic are we talking?" one of them finally asked. Simone crossed her legs, considering them for a moment. "I've been thinking a lot about Pinecrest's values," she said smoothly. "What it stood for, what it represented." She let her gaze sweep over them, watching them shift under her scrutiny. "And it turns out, I don't see much value in keeping things the way they were." Harold's lips thinned. "So what? You'll run the place into the ground out of spite?" She chuckled, shaking her head. "Oh no, I have much bigger plans than that." She stood, smoothing out her blazer. "Pinecrest will be rebranded. It will be open to all, regardless of race, background, or status. We'll be funding youth golf programs, offering scholarships, and, she flashed a knowing smirk, removing the outdated membership policies that were keeping people like me out. The room tensed. This club was built to exclude, she continued, her voice calm but unyielding. But now, it's going to be a place that welcomes. A place that represents the future of golf, not its past. The silence was thick. Some of them looked ready to burst, others simply deflated, knowing there was nothing left to fight for. Harold exhaled sharply, shaking his head. You'll ruin everything we built. She picked up the finalized documents, tucking them neatly into her briefcase. No, she corrected, flashing a smile as she turned for the door. I'll fix it. Her transition wasn't smooth, but Simone had expected that. For weeks, Pinecrest's old guard tried to fight back. Petitions were circulated among the more stubborn members. Desperate attempts to challenge her acquisition in court were made, and a handful of the wealthiest members even attempted to buy back their influence. None of it worked. The truth was, the power they thought they had only existed because no one had ever challenged it before. And now, the challenge had come in the form of a woman they had underestimated. Simone didn't waste time. The club's new policies were announced within days of the acquisition. Membership was no longer dictated by legacy or exclusivity, but by passion for the sport. The junior program she had hinted at in the boardroom was set into motion, with scholarships and sponsorships for young players who had been locked out of elite training spaces for too long. And the most controversial decision of all, Pinecrest was now fully open to the public on select days. The backlash was immediate. The old members fumed. They canceled their memberships in droves, their final acts of defiance. Some went quietly. Others left kicking and screaming, claiming Simone had destroyed a historical institution. But for every old member who stormed out, a new wave of golfers arrived. Players who had never been allowed past the gates now walked the pristine fairways. On opening day under new management, Simone stood at the clubhouse balcony, watching as families, young athletes, and even retired players stepped onto the greens for the first time. She could hear the laughter, the excited chatter, the genuine joy of people who had never imagined setting foot here. She had turned Pinecrest into something it had never been, a place for everyone. The former board members had refused to attend the reopening. She didn't care. They weren't the future of golf. A familiar voice pulled her from her thoughts. Not bad, boss lady. She turned to see Anthony Reynolds, a retired black pro golfer she had long admired, leaning against the railing with an approving smirk. Not bad at all, she replied, smiling. Anthony had been one of the first to reach out when news of her takeover broke. He had seen firsthand how many doors had been shut for players like him. Now, with Simone at the helm, he had offered to mentor young golfers through Pinecrest's new development programs. You know they'll never get over this, right? He mused, watching a pair of teenagers excitedly take their first swings on the range. Simone shrugged. They don't have to. She had spent her whole life proving people wrong. This time, she wasn't just proving a point. She was creating something lasting. Something that would outlive her, outlive the old board, and outlive the tired traditions that had kept people like her locked out for so long. As she watched a young black girl grip her club with determination, her father standing proudly beside her offering encouragement, Simone felt something settle inside her. She hadn't just won. She had changed the game.